Hey everyone, in today's video we are talking all about how to teach subtraction to kindergarten students. Earlier this year I made a video about teaching addition to kindergarten students. It looks like this, and I walked through the 5 kind of major steps I take when doing that. So I wanted to do the same thing but for subtraction. Now I love teaching math in kindergarten. It's kind of those basic building blocks of math, right? We focus a lot on counting, number sense, what do these numbers really mean? And then when we're talking about addition and subtraction, we really want students to understand that when we are adding, we're getting bigger, we're joining things, and when we're subtracting, we are taking something away to get even smaller. The concepts may seem pretty simple, and of course to adults they are relatively simple, but with our youngest students, we really want to make sure we spend the time helping students understand what this whole concept of subtraction really is. So in this video, I'm going to walk through the 5 major steps I take to teach this to our youngest learners. If you are ready, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and let's dive in. Alright, step 1 when you are teaching subtraction to kindergarten students is going to be to explicitly teach what subtraction is. Now, if you've been following along with a lot of my videos, that's pretty much always step 1 when teaching a new concept, especially to our youngest learners. You will want to explicitly tell them that we're learning something new and this is what it is. Now with subtraction, they are going to want to know that we are starting with a number. Often things will get taken away, and so that number is going to get smaller. You're going to want to use like minus, subtract, difference. We're finding the difference. And you can usually do this using any sort of anchor chart, and on that anchor chart you can draw like a little example about, 5 birds sitting on a tree branch and 2 flew away. How many were left? Just as an easy example. Also, while introducing subtraction, I would definitely compare it to addition, since in most classrooms, I believe you would teach subtraction after you've taught addition. You can explain to them how we already learned what adding is, and you can even show them an equation with the plus sign and the equal sign, and ask them to compare what they notice about addition and subtraction. How is it different? How are they the same? They might notice things like, oh, you still have 2 numbers and an equal sign, but instead of a plus sign, now you have a minus sign. They will notice that the numbers get smaller. And even if they don't notice this, you can kind of nudge this along. But you can notice how the numbers end up getting smaller. Students might notice that the first number in our subtraction problem is always going to be larger, at least for K through 2, but it's always going to be larger than that second number. But these are some of the things you'll want to explain to students as they are introduced to subtraction. Now on this first day, when you've, explicitly taught them what subtraction is, compared it with addition, maybe showed them an anchor chart, some examples on the board, I would have them practice solving just a couple subtraction problems with you. To do this, you could write an equation on the board that maybe says 6 minus 4 equals blank. And then we can brainstorm some strategies for solving this. We could let students know that we can use our fingers. Let's put 6 fingers up, and we know we are taking away 4 because of that minus sign there. So let's take away 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many are left? 2. We could show students that we could draw pictures. We can draw 6 circles on the board and cross out or erase 4 of them. How many are left? 2. You can also show them that they can use things like manipulatives, like cubes or buttons or any sort of tactile thing that represents the problem. And we're starting with 6, and you can point out to students that even though we're solving this problem, 6 minus 4 equals blank, many different ways, we're still getting the same answer. And we're effectively still doing the same thing. We can put 6 cubes on our desk, and we're still going to take away 4 of them. So we're starting with some number, we're taking away some, and then we are left with the difference. Alright, so step 1 was to, explicitly teach what subtraction is, give them an anchor chart, identify some key terms, and even give them a few strategies for how to solve some basic subtraction problems. But now step 2 is going to be to have them use manipulatives. That is one of the strategies that you can teach them, but now we want students to practice solving subtraction problems using these manipulatives over and over and over. Repetition is key with this, and actually having tactile things like cubes or those little bears, buttons, really anything you can get your hands on is going to be very helpful for students to really fully comprehend the idea of starting with a number and taking some away and watching that number get smaller. Now, in doing this, I like to put a sentence stem up on the board that maybe looks something like this, where it says blank minus blank equals blank. And they can go ahead and see that equation with those missing numbers there. That way, when students are solving these problems, they're doing it with manipulatives so they can feel it, see it, know what it looks like, but then they can also go ahead and fill in that equation and practice using that math language. You can do this many different ways, and I would definitely start this using some guided practice, meaning I would tell them how many cubes they're going to start with and how many they're going to take away. So I might say, all right, students, let's pretend everybody has like 10 cubes or 10 bears on their desk. I would say, all right, let's start with 8. So they'll have to count out 8. And I'm gonna say 8, let's take away 4 of those cubes or 4 of the bears, and they would have to remove them. And then they would practice saying 8 minus 4 equals 4. And it's even more helpful if they have a little whiteboard or a mat with that equation on it that they can, that's like a dry erase board, so they can just get rid of it and they can write 8 minus 4 equals 4 and practice saying it aloud or to a partner. And then you'll do it again. You'll say, okay, move those over. This time let's start with 6. They'll put 6 bears out. Let's take away 2. 6 minus 2 equals 4. You'll want to practice this a few times with your students. This way you can quickly walk around and see kind of who's getting this, who still might have trouble getting those 6 cubes to start with, or who's having trouble taking them away or saying the right language. Just get a quick little check-in on your students. Now, once students have done this guided practice a few times, I definitely like to pass it off into either partner or independent work for them to practice on their own, still using manipulatives. One of my favorite activities for that is this right here. This is from my kindergarten subtraction unit, and it's just a little cookie map that students will get with a bunch of different practice subtraction problems in it within 10. So here I like to give students a little thing of Play-Doh, and they will have to pick a card. This one says 3 minus 1, and they will go ahead and roll their little Play-Doh into cookies. They'll make 3 big cookie balls, and then they will go ahead and smush. They can either smush it down or they can remove it, however many they're supposed to subtract, to get their answer. Again, it's fun, it's tactile, it's engaging, but it also gets them to see by either smushing it down or removing it entirely that they are removing that and the number is getting smaller. And then they can practice writing out that equation and saying those mathematical terms as well. Now, that example was a cookie example. There are so many different ways you can practice this with your students. You could print out a picture of a tree branch, going back to that first example I gave, and you could pretend and tell students that, you know, all the cubes you're giving them are birds, and they can actually put the cubes on the tree branch and then remove them to make these different equations. There's so many different fun ways to make it engaging for your kids. Now, I do want to point out with this whole step of using manipulatives that there is another way I like to show students what this subtraction looks like, and that is through images. Here's an example of what I mean by that. Here is a solve the room example from my kindergarten subtraction pack, where I actually have students look at what subtraction equation or what subtraction problem is being shown with these images. So here is one right here where it has, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cubes stacked into a tower, and 1 is crossed out. So this would be showing 10 minus 1. Here's another one with 5 circles and 2 are crossed out, so 5 minus 2 equals 3. This is another way I would show students how to represent a subtraction problem. So when we move past those manipulatives, or if students would rather choose to solve it by drawing pictures, they can do just that. And it also lets them see a problem and they have to figure out what the problem represents, which is a little higher order thinking for them, as opposed to just being told the equation and then having to show it. Now, obviously this would not be done in just one day. This entire step 2 lesson here or activity here is like spread out over a week or 2. So all week long, students are practicing different types of subtraction equations with manipulatives. Maybe one day they're doing the cookies and the Play-Doh. The next day they're doing the branch and the little pretend birds. Then they can do that read the room activity. You'll want to continue practicing this over and over. All right, step 3 for teaching subtraction to kindergarten students is going to be to make sure you use some story problems to represent subtraction. Now, this of course sounds obvious, but I do like to make sure that my students have a solid understanding of those number equations first and just showing how to solve it, because oftentimes when we add words and we add, stories to these math problems, sometimes it can make it easier if students can visualize it, but most times it actually makes it a little trickier for our students. There's just a lot more for them to have to understand before they even begin solving the problem. In order to do this, you're going to want to give your students a lot of exposure to different subtraction problems, but remember this is kindergarten, and in kindergarten the only really type of subtraction word problem your students will need to know are those separating problems. So if you don't know what that means, I have a whole video right here on the different types of word problems we teach to our students, but in kindergarten they are really focusing on those separating ones, meaning there's an action of some kind where something is being taken away. For example, I had 5 cookies on my plate. I ate 2 of them. How many are left? So there's like a clear action. I started with 5, I ate 2, they're gone. How many are left? 5 birds on a tree branch. 3 of them flew away. Action, they actually left. How many are still on the branch? Thankfully, this type of word problem is the easiest to brainstorm, and with the numbers that we're working with in kindergarten, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to come up with your own. But for examples like these, I do like to, like I mentioned in step 2, I like to have them use manipulatives, and I also like them to represent it with pictures. So here are a couple examples of activities I like to do in my class. These again are from my kindergarten subtraction unit, but here's a fun one to use with any of those little counting math bears, and of course you can substitute bears with cubes or buttons or anything. But each one you have a little mat here, and you can just take one of the subtraction stories and put it up in the top. 5 bears are walking. 2 bears walk into the forest. How many bears did not go into the forest? And they will actually start with their 5 bears over in that big area, and then they will move 2 to the did not go into the forest, so the remove pile. And then they have to write an equation. 5 minus 2, how many are still left over there? Of course, I would laminate that page so they can use it with a dry erase marker, and then they will erase it and use another one. 7 bears are hungry. 1 bear eats a snack and the others wait for dinner. How many bears waited for dinner? So they start with the 7, they remove 1, and have to figure out how many are left. That one obviously uses manipulatives for them to add and then remove from. And then here's another one with some picture examples. This is word story match, so this one's a little trickier because here students will have to read the word problem. Michael got 3 bouncy balls for his birthday. He lost 1 bouncy ball. How many bouncy balls does he have? They have to actually look and find which one of these images matches that problem. Once they find the correct image, I also have them go over to their recording sheet and they have to show it on there as well. So they'll actually draw the 3 circles into the 10 frame, and then they will go ahead and cross one out to get the answer. Basically, during this step, you're going to want to make sure you're integrating lots of story problems, have them think about what that story problem is saying and how they can represent it and solve it to get their answer. All right, step number 4 when teaching subtraction to your kindergarten students is to focus on decomposition. Now, we do so much in terms of decomposing numbers when we talk about addition, but we want students to recognize that we can decompose numbers and numbers can be made different ways with subtraction as well. For example, if we are talking about the number 5, we often teach students that they can get the number 5 by, adding 5 and 0, by adding 2 and 3, by adding 4 and 1. They can get that number so many different ways. But I also like to show students that within 10, because again, we're in kindergarten, so we're focused on numbers within 10, but there's other ways we can get 5 too. We could do 5 minus 0 equals 5. We could do 10 minus 5 equals 5. We could do 6 minus 1 equals 5. There's more than one way to get that number. Again, this is kind of that next step for students to think about when they're learning about subtraction, and I'm doing this video in order of steps, not meaning like I teach this for one day and this for the next day, but you do kind of want to go in this order for students to make sure that they understand the concepts before you get to this one. And they don't need to master it, but they do need to have some sort of understanding. For example, you're going to explicitly teach what subtraction is before you just have them do it. You'll want them to be familiar with solving subtraction problems and some strategies before you just throw them into story problems. So this is a general guideline of ideas and activities you might want to take with your students in this order. So with decomposing numbers, I love an activity like this one right here. This is a simple find the difference matching game where they will have different numbers, again with the numbers 0 through 9, and they will have to identify different ways to make each number. So here under the 7, we can see 8 minus 1. So again, students will have to know how to solve that using any strategy that they have, but then they also have a visual here too. And in this one, we see 9 in a 10 frame, and 2 of them are crossed out to leave us with a difference of 7. So for all of these numbers to match up, there's an equation and there's also a visual representation, both with different equations to make that number. I also have a very simple bingo game that you can play. Here is the bingo board, and basically with this, you would just call out different equations. This is a very simple one to do, and there's going to be each number on the board more than once. So if they're trying to get a difference of 5, again, you might say 7 minus 2, and they'll find out, oh, 5. But then you also later might say 8 minus 3. That also equals 5. Gets them to see all the different equations that can make that number. And last but not least, step number 5 is to have students work on fluency. In kindergarten, students need to, by the end of the year, be fluent in addition and subtraction within 5. Now, we usually practice within 10. All these different steps will usually use up to 10 manipulatives, 10 being the start, and then they'll get differences, within that. But they need to be fluent within 5. There are many different ways to have your students become fluent, and realistically, walking through all these steps with all this practice is only going to help them get there. But then, if you know me, you know I like to use games to also practice with our fluency. Now, I have a ton of different quick and easy subtraction fluency games. I do have 2 simple ones in the kindergarten subtraction unit I've been talking about with all the other activities that I've shared in this video. So these ones do look like this. There's fluency graphing spinners. There's a few different ones where they will have to go ahead and get differences within 5 and graph it with a partner. And then there is a subtraction memory game here as well. Now, while I love both of those, I really enjoy my print and play partner games. So I wanted to share a couple of those as well, and I also have a freebie for you. So here's what my kindergarten print and play subtraction unit looks like. I have, for every skill that you teach in kindergarten, I have a different unit for. So this one is all about subtraction. And it has 6 different games inside that are all made for teacher ease. So you just print them and they're ready to go. And they help students practice their fluency with subtraction. Here's one of my favorites. It's called Fill the Truck. So for this one, students are working on how to get to 10. So kind of, again, decomposition. And they're going to start with the number 10, and they have to figure out how many more they need to fill the truck. So they will spin that little spinner, and this one shows it landed on 6. So they will take 6 different cubes, you can see by those green ones up there, and they need to figure out how many more they need to make 10. So there's a couple different ways they can do this. They can actually do this using their addition or subtraction knowledge. They can know 6 plus how many more equals 10, or they can start with 10 and take away 6 to see how many they have left over. They'll go ahead and continue spinning and subtracting that number from 10 to fill up that whole truck. So once all those numbers are filled in, the game is over. And there's a couple different fill the truck boards. So it doesn't just have those 4 numbers. The other ones have other numbers as well. Another game I love from this unit is right here. It's called Buzzin' Bees. And this one is just a very simple game where students have to start on their player spot and they will move around the board and they'll just have to solve that subtraction problem. When they find the answer, and they can do this however they want, whether they use manipulatives, they use their fingers, or they just, use mental math, they can solve it and then fill in the difference within the hive. Students complete that one over and over again until either a time limit has been reached or the entire grid is filled in, and then they see who colored in the most. I actually went ahead and took that Buzzin' Bees game and I made it into a little freebie for you. So if you have students in kindergarten or even first grade who are practicing subtraction within 10, they can go ahead and play that partner game with a friend. So just to run through those steps real quickly one more time. Step 1 is to explicitly teach subtraction. Step 2 is use manipulatives and images. Step 3 is to make sure you use story problems. Step 4 is to think about decomposition. And step 5 is to have students practice fluency with their math problems. Those are the 5 kind of major areas or major steps I take when teaching subtraction to our youngest learners. If you have any other tips or ideas or strategies, please leave them down in the comments. I would love to read them, and I'm sure other teachers would as well. As always, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel and click that bell. That way you're notified of all my new videos. And I will go ahead and link the addition one for kindergarten, the video that I made, in the description in case you want to check that one out too. See you in the next one. Bye.